It was a typical Wednesday afternoon when I picked up the phone, expecting another mundane conversation with my son Daniel. He had recently taken a new job, one that required frequent travel. I was proud of him, watching him grow into a successful young man. It had been tough for him at first, trying to find his place in the world after college, but now things seemed to be falling into place. The job had potential, and with each trip, he seemed to be growing more confident. I thought to myself how lucky I was to have such a bright son. I was sitting on the couch, sipping a cup of tea and flipping through a book, when the phone rang. The caller ID flashed his name, and I smiled to myself. "Hey, Daniel," I answered, happy to hear from him. "Hey, Mom, how are you?" Daniel's voice was cheerful, though there was something in his tone that made me pause. It wasn't alarming, just a small shift that I couldn't quite place. "I'm doing well, honey. How's the trip going?" "Everything okay?" I asked, settling deeper into the cushions. It wasn't the first time he'd been away for work, and usually we spoke every evening when he was on business trips. But today, there was something different. Maybe it was just me being overly cautious. Parenting never ends, even when your children grow up. "Oh, it's the usual," Daniel replied, his voice sounding far away as though he was distracted. "Busy, but I'll be back before. You know it. I'll give you a call later this week, just wanted to check in." "Oh, and everything's fine at home too. Don't worry." I noticed the emphasis on "don't worry," and for a moment, I wondered why he felt the need to say that. We had never been the kind of family to have secrets from one another, so the strange reassurance felt odd. But I pushed it aside, choosing not to dwell on it. My son had his hands full with work, and I was sure he just wanted to avoid worrying me about anything. "Okay, well, stay safe. Let me know if you need anything, okay?" I said, my tone warm and motherly, but there was a slight knot of unease forming in my stomach. I couldn't help it. I had learned over the years that intuition, though sometimes irrational, often had a way of signaling when something wasn't quite right. "I will, Mom. Take care," he said, the call ending abruptly. There wasn't the usual back and forth, the lingering small talk that we often had. It was as though he was rushing off to something important. As the phone call ended, I set it down beside me, letting out a slow breath. It was nothing, I told myself. He was busy, and I was just overthinking things. Life had been a whirlwind for him lately, adjusting to the new role and the responsibilities that came with it. I couldn't help but feel proud of the man he had become. Even so, my thoughts lingered on the odd feeling I couldn't shake. Something in his voice had seemed forced, as though he was hiding something, but I couldn't figure out what. Tried to put the thoughts out of my mind, reminding myself that he was doing well. I looked around the house, filled with all the memories of our family. The framed pictures on the wall, the old armchair where we spent hours talking when he was younger, the kitchen where I had prepared so many of his favorite meals. It all seemed to whisper the warmth of our shared history. But as I sat there, my mind kept drifting back to that phone call. Daniel was my son, my pride and joy, and there was nothing he could do that would make me stop loving him. But was there something he wasn't telling me? I couldn't help but wonder. I shook my head and tried to push the thoughts aside. "You're just being paranoid," I whispered to myself, taking another sip of tea. But deep down, I couldn't ignore that nagging feeling. It would take a few days before I would realize that my gut had been right all along. For now, though, I tried to put it out of my mind. The house was quiet and life moved forward in its familiar rhythm. But in the back of my mind, that small doubt lingered, quietly growing as the days passed. The unexpected call had left me with more questions than answers, and I wouldn't know just how important that feeling of unease was until it was too late. The days following my brief conversation with Daniel were filled with an unsettling quietness. I busied myself with daily routines, cleaning, tending to the garden, and catching up on some reading, but my mind kept drifting back to that phone call. There was nothing overtly wrong, but something in his voice had made me uneasy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important. At first, I told myself it was nothing more than an overactive imagination. After all, Daniel was grown now, and he had responsibilities that kept him busy. He didn't always have the time for long conversations when he was away on work trips, so I should have expected that he might not call every day. But still, I couldn't help but feel a growing sense of discomfort. I tried reaching out to him a few times, but each time, the result was the same. His phone went straight to voicemail. The silence was deafening. Daniel was never this unreachable. By the fourth day, the feeling in my stomach had turned from mild curiosity to full-on worry. I sent him a couple of texts, just short, casual messages asking how the trip was going. No response. The longer it went on, the more I began to question myself. Was I overreacting? Did I have a right to be concerned? I knew he was busy, but this silence was unlike him. He had always been good about keeping in touch, even when his schedule was tight. This absence was different. The worrying thoughts swirled in my head like a storm. I had tried so hard not to jump to conclusions, but now I couldn't help but feel a cold knot of dread tightening in my chest. Something wasn't right. I sat by the phone, waiting for a call that never came. The house, which had once felt full of life, now seemed eerily empty. I spent my evenings sitting in the living room, staring out the window, half expecting Daniel to walk through the door any minute. But each day that passed without a word made my unease grow. I tried to keep my composure. I didn't want to appear paranoid, especially if there was nothing to be concerned about. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was being hidden from me. Daniel wasn't one to keep secrets, at least not from me. He had always been an open book. We had shared everything, from his first crush to his biggest failures. So why, all of a sudden, was he becoming distant? One evening, as I sat down to dinner alone, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, but I stood up to answer it, hoping it might be Daniel. When I opened the door, I was greeted not by my son, but by an envelope, delivered by hand. It was addressed to me, and the handwriting on the front was unfamiliar. My heart skipped a beat as I opened it, unsure of what I was about to read. Inside was a letter from the bank, informing me that my mortgage had been paid off in full. It was a standard letter, but the shock came when I read the next line. The property has been transferred to a new owner. I froze, my hand trembling as I read the words again. My mind raced. What did this mean? Had I forgotten to make a payment? Was this some sort of mistake? But no, I knew I hadn't missed a payment. I had been meticulous about it, never once letting it slip. The letter was clear. Someone had sold my house. But who? My heart started to pound in my chest. As I realized something, there was only one person who could have done this without my consent. Daniel. I tried to stay calm, my mind frantically searching for an explanation. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Maybe someone had forged my signature. But deep down, I knew the truth. My son had sold my house. My son, the one I had trusted, had made a decision that changed everything. I didn't panic. Not yet. But the knot in my stomach tightened even further. I immediately grabbed my phone, trying to call Daniel once again. No answer. I left a message, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel, what's going on? Why didn't you tell me about this? Call me as soon as you get this. The silence that followed was deafening. The next few hours felt like a blur, each minute dragging as I grappled with the shocking news from the bank. I couldn't comprehend what had just happened. My mind raced, going over everything. What had I missed? How could I have let this slip past me? I had no idea that the house was about to be sold, and yet, here I was, standing in the middle of a nightmare I never saw coming. I paced the house, the letter clutched tightly in my hand. Every room I entered, every corner I glanced at, seemed foreign, as if the house was no longer mine. My thoughts were chaotic, but the one thing that kept echoing in my head was the same. Daniel had sold my house. My son, the person I had trusted above all others, had done something I could never have imagined. I dialed his number once again, my fingers trembling as I pressed the call button. Once again, it went straight to voicemail. Daniel, I said, softly into the phone, my voice shaking. I need you to explain this to me. Please call me. This isn't funny anymore. But there was no response. I didn't want to believe it. I couldn't. But every time I thought about it, the weight of the situation grew heavier. I went over the details of the letter again, hoping to find something, anything, that would give me a different answer. But there was no mistake. The property had been sold, and the bank's records showed that the deed had been transferred. And the name that appeared on those documents? My son's. Daniel had signed something that I hadn't authorized, and now my home was gone. My head swirled with a mixture of anger and disbelief. How could he have done this? He knew how much this house meant to me, to all of us. This wasn't just a building. It was the place where Daniel had grown up. It was filled with memories, the kind that couldn't be erased with a single signature. I couldn't fathom why he would do something so drastic, something so permanent, without telling me, without even giving me a chance to understand his reasons. I didn't know what to do. My hands were shaking as I tried to process the information. The house was gone. The life I had built, the walls that had witnessed my struggles, my joys, my heartbreaks, all of it was being taken from me without warning. It was hard to breathe. I felt as though the ground beneath me was shifting, and I was about to lose everything I had ever worked for. In a haze, I grabbed my coat and keys and decided to go to the bank. I needed answers, something that could explain this madness. The drive felt like it took forever. Every mile seemed to stretch out, my mind racing through possible scenarios, none of them making sense. What had pushed Daniel to do this? Was he in trouble? Had he been coerced into selling the house? I thought about calling the police, but what would I say? That my son had sold my house without my permission? It sounded insane, even to me. When I arrived at the bank, I rushed to the customer service desk, desperate for any shred of clarity. The woman behind the counter greeted me with a polite smile, but I could see the concern in her eyes as I explained my situation. She took the letter from my hands and typed into her computer, scanning through the bank's records. After what felt like an eternity, she turned the screen toward me. "Ma'am," she said softly, "this transaction was completed by someone claiming to be your power of attorney. The signatures were verified, and the sale was processed." Power of attorney? My mind reeled. My son had the authority to sign. For me? Had he really done this without even talking to me first? I felt as though the room was spinning. It didn't make sense. Daniel had never mentioned anything about handling legal matters for me. We had always discussed everything openly, especially big decisions like this. I wanted to scream, to shout at her for giving away something so precious, but I knew she was just doing her job. She wasn't to blame. She gave me a sympathetic look, then handed me a small stack of papers, documents outlining the sale and the transaction details. As I held them in my hand, it hit me like a ton of bricks. My son had made this choice. He had signed these documents, and now I was standing in the ruins of my own life. I left the bank in a daze, the weight of the situation pressing down on me like a physical force. I had no idea where to go from here. I needed to confront Daniel, but I didn't know if I could handle hearing his reasons for what he had done. Could I ever forgive him? Could I ever trust him again? The sun was setting as I made my way home, and the world outside seemed as dark as the storm brewing in my heart. The house that I had spent so many years in, that had been my sanctuary, was no longer mine. And the son I had loved and trusted had shattered that bond, leaving me questioning everything. I didn't panic. Not yet. But the pit in my stomach was growing, and every step I took felt like it was in slow motion. The truth hit me like a freight train. Daniel had sold my house. My sanctuary, the place where I had spent years building memories, was now gone, without my knowledge, without my consent. The bank documents were clear, and though I tried to cling to the hope that there had been some kind of mistake, deep down, I knew the truth. But why? Why would my son, my own flesh and blood, do something so drastic without even speaking to me about it? I couldn't make sense of it. Daniel was responsible, always thoughtful and respectful of my opinions. He was never the type to make such a monumental decision without including me, especially one that involved the roof over our heads. In a daze, I walked through the empty house, touching the familiar objects that had once been a comfort to me. The old armchair by the window, the kitchen table where we'd shared so many meals, the family photos on the walls, all of it felt distant now. The place that had once felt like home now felt cold and unwelcoming. The walls that had seen the laughter, the tears, and the small moments of joy now seemed to echo with silence. I had to find Daniel. I needed answers. I couldn't just sit here and let this lie unanswered. The house was gone, but I needed to understand why he had done it. Where was he? Why was he avoiding me? I picked up the phone once more and dialed his number. But once, again, it went straight to voicemail. The familiar feeling of unease settled back in as I left yet another message. Daniel, please, where are you? Call me. We need to talk. This isn't like you. The silence from the other end of the phone was suffocating. I had raised Daniel to be honest, to communicate. Yet here he was, silent, distant, almost as if he were hiding from me. I wasn't sure how much more I could take. I couldn't just wait for him to call me back. I needed to see him in person, to confront him face to face and make him explain himself. With my heart heavy and my mind racing, I grabbed my coat and decided to go to the address the bank had provided for the new owners of the house. I had no idea what I'd find, but I had to do something. I couldn't just stand by while my son, my own flesh and blood, made decisions that tore everything I knew apart. The drive felt longer than it should have. My mind was clouded with questions. Why had he done this? Had he really needed the money? That badly? Had he gotten himself into some kind of trouble? I kept imagining the worst possible scenarios, each one more terrifying than the last. But nothing prepared me for what I found when I reached the new owner's house. It wasn't just that the house was sold. It was that someone else was living in it. The driveway was lined with new cars, the front lawn well kept, and the windows were adorned with new curtains. The place was practically unrecognizable. I stood in front of the house, my heart heavy, my mind spinning. It felt like an alien landscape. This wasn't the home I had raised my son in. It wasn't the house I had put my blood, sweat, and tears. Anew, it felt like a stranger's house, and I didn't belong here anymore. I approached the front door, hesitating for just a moment before ringing the bell. A man in his mid-30s opened the door, looking surprised to see me standing there. I explained who I was and why I was there, and after a few awkward moments, he invited me inside. The house, though beautifully renovated, lacked the warmth and familiarity that had once filled it. The walls seemed hollow, as if the essence of the home had been stripped away. I tried to keep my emotions in check as I asked the man questions about how he had acquired the property. He explained that he and his wife had bought it from a private seller. I could see the confusion in his eyes as I asked more questions, but the truth was clear. Daniel had sold my house, and it had been taken over by someone else. As I stood there, in this unfamiliar place, the weight of everything hit me all at once. I felt betrayed, abandoned, and heartbroken. This wasn't just about losing a house. It was about losing trust in the one person I had trusted most in this world. My son had made a decision, one so huge, without even considering how it would affect me. I couldn't fathom why he hadn't come to me for help, why he hadn't tried to work things out before resorting to this drastic step. I thanked the man for his time and left the house, feeling like a stranger in my own life. The drive back was a blur, and when I arrived home, I felt empty. The house I had known for so long no longer felt like mine. It had been taken from me, and with it, a part of my heart seemed to have gone too. I knew I had to confront Daniel, whether he was ready for it or not. But as I sat there, alone in the quiet of the house that no longer felt like home, I realized that nothing could ever undo what had been done. The house was gone, and whatever lay ahead, I had to face it, no matter how painful it might be. Days passed, each one heavier than the last, as I replayed the events over and over in my head. The house was gone, and I was left trying to piece together the fragments of what had once been my life. My son, Daniel, had disappeared into the void, leaving me alone with the overwhelming confusion and pain. Every attempt I made to contact him had been met with silence. The anger I had felt earlier now mingled with a deep sense of loss. What had happened to the boy I had raised? Where was the son who had always been open, who had trusted me with his thoughts, his hopes, and his fears? I had tried everything I could think of, calling, texting, even sending him messages through social media. Yet each effort ended the same way, unanswered. I sat at home, surrounded by the empty walls that used to echo with the sound of his laughter, wondering if I would ever get the chance to understand what had driven him to make such a drastic decision. Then, one afternoon, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, and for a moment, I thought it might be another of the new owners checking in on something. But when I opened the door, standing there was Daniel. He looked different. His face was pale, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion, and there was a weight about him that hadn't been there before. The man who stood on my doorstep was a stranger, a shell of the son I had known. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence between us was thick, laden with all the unsaid words and emotions we had been carrying. I wanted to scream at him, to demand answers, but instead, I found myself frozen, unsure of what to say. Finally, Daniel spoke, his voice softer than I had ever heard it. "Mom, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his eyes not meeting mine. "I didn't know how to tell you. I didn't know what else to do." I stood there, stunned, as the flood of emotions I had been holding back surged forward. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words wouldn't come. My heart raced, a mix of anger, confusion, and hurt tightening in my chest. I stepped back, allowing him to enter, though every part of me wanted to shut the door and walk away from the nightmare that had unfolded. We sat in the living room, an awkward distance between us. I studied his face, looking for any sign of the person I used to know. He was still my son, but he seemed so far away, so changed. He began to speak again, his voice trembling with shame. I never meant for it to happen like this. I didn't want to hurt you, Mom. I thought I could fix everything without you knowing. But things got out of hand, and I didn't know what else to do, he said, his eyes brimming with unshed tears. I waited for him to continue, my heart pounding. I had so many questions, so many things I needed to understand. But the one thing that stood out, that cut through the fog of my emotions, was the underlying sense of regret in his voice. Whatever he had done, he was carrying the weight of it. He wasn't proud of what had happened. Still, I needed to know why. Why had he done this? Why, Daniel? I asked quietly, my voice barely above a whisper. Why would you sell the house? Why didn't you come to me? He took a deep breath, the words coming slowly, almost as if they were painful to say. I got into debt, Mom. A lot of debt. The company I was working for went under, and the bills kept piling up. I thought I could get ahead of it, that I could pay everything off before it got bad. But then, it just kept getting worse. I tried everything, but the loans, the credit cards, the bills, they all added up. His voice faltered as he looked up at me. I thought I could handle it. I didn't want you to worry. And when the bank threatened foreclosure, I panicked. I didn't know what to do, so I took out a loan using the house as collateral. And when that didn't cover it, I thought selling the house was the only way out. I didn't think it through. I didn't think about how it would affect you. I listened in stunned silence, the truth of his words sinking in. My mind struggled to process it. Daniel, my son, had been drowning in debt, and instead of turning to me for help, he had made a decision that felt like the ultimate betrayal. I understood now, the desperation in his voice, the fear that had driven him to make such a drastic choice. But it didn't make it hurt any less. Why didn't you talk to me? I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. Why didn't you ask for help? I would have helped you, Daniel. We could have worked through it together. His face crumpled with guilt. I didn't want to disappoint you, Mom. I didn't want you to see me as a failure. I thought I could fix it on my own, but I was wrong. The weight of his confession hung in the air, and for a long moment neither of us spoke. I didn't know what to say. The hurt was there, deep and raw, but so was the understanding. I knew Daniel had made a mistake, a huge one, but I also knew that he was still my son. And in that moment, I realized that while the house could be replaced, the bond we shared was not so easily fixed. I reached out to him, and he met me halfway, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. We held each other for a long time, both of us lost in the overwhelming mix of emotions that had consumed us. It wasn't easy, and it wouldn't be fixed overnight, but at least now we could begin the long process of healing. It took days for the initial shock to wear off, and even then, the heavy weight of the situation never really lifted. After Daniel's confession, I spent a lot of time in silence, wrestling with my thoughts. I had heard his reasons for what he did, and part of me understood the fear and panic he must have felt. The weight of overwhelming debt, the constant pressure to fix everything on his own. had driven him to make decisions that, in hindsight, seemed impulsive and reckless. Yet, understanding didn't erase the hurt. I couldn't simply forget that my own son had sold my house, the home that had been in our family for years, a place filled with memories of laughter, sorrow, and growth. I couldn't simply erase the betrayal I felt. In the days that followed, Daniel and I spoke more. He didn't stay with me in the house anymore. He'd gone back to a friend's place to give me some space. But he called, texted, and showed up at the door every day, apologizing, expressing his guilt, and offering to do anything to make it right. His sincerity was undeniable, and part of me wanted to believe that his regret was real. But every time I heard his voice or saw his face, the same bitter feeling of betrayal would rise within me, choking out any progress we might have made. I knew I had to forgive him. I knew it in my heart. But forgiveness is never as simple as it sounds. How could I forgive him for doing something so permanent, so final, without even discussing it with me? He had chosen to carry the burden of his problems alone, and in doing so, he had dragged me into them without my consent. I started seeing a therapist, not for myself, but for Daniel. He didn't ask me to go, but I knew he needed me to be stronger, to help him figure out how to rebuild our trust. I spent hours there, pouring out all the anger and confusion I felt. The therapist helped me see things from a different perspective, that Daniel had acted out of fear, not malice. That in his desperation he had made a mistake, but it didn't mean he had betrayed me in the way I had initially thought. The therapist also helped me realize that, while it was important for me to hold Daniel accountable for his actions, it was also important for me to separate his mistake from who he was as a person. The two were not the same, and as much as I struggled with the hurt, I knew I had to find a way to rebuild our relationship or risk losing it completely. Still, forgiveness wasn't easy. There were moments when I felt overwhelmed by it all, when I wished things could go back to the way they were before everything changed. But I reminded myself of all the love and care Daniel had shown me throughout the years. I couldn't throw that away just because of one massive, albeit painful, mistake. One afternoon, as I sat on the porch, sipping my coffee, Daniel knocked on the door. I invited him in, and we sat together in silence for a while, the weight of our past hanging over us. Finally, he broke the silence, his voice tinged with emotion. "Mom, I don't know how to fix this. I don't know how to make up for what I've done," he said, his voice trembling. "I know I've lost your trust, and I don't know how to get it back." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw the boy I had raised, the man he was becoming. I knew this wasn't the same Daniel who had sold the house. That was a mistake made out of fear and desperation, not a reflection of who he truly was. "Daniel," I said softly, "it's going to take time. I'm not going to pretend that everything's fine, and I'm not going to say I'm okay right away. But you need to understand that you hurt me. I'm not just mad about the house. I'm hurt because you didn't trust me enough to come to me for help. You didn't give me the chance to be there for you." He nodded, his eyes filling with tears. I'm sorry, Mom. I thought I was protecting you by doing it all on my own. I was ashamed and I thought I could fix everything before you found out. I never meant for any of this to happen. I know, I whispered. But it's going to take time. It's going to take time for me to forgive you fully. But I want to try. I'm not giving up on us, Daniel. But you have to know that rebuilding trust isn't something that happens overnight. You've got to prove to me that you can be open with me, that you're ready to face the consequences of your actions. His face softened with understanding. I'll do whatever it takes, Mom. I don't want to lose you. I nodded slowly, feeling a shift in the air between us. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. We had both been hurt, and it was going to take time for us to heal. But the first step was acknowledging the pain and being honest about it. Daniel had made a mistake, one that had impacted both of us deeply, but we were still family, and that at least was something worth fighting for. As I looked at him, I realized that forgiveness wasn't just about moving past what had happened. It was about understanding the fear that drove the action and making a conscious choice to rebuild what had been broken. It was going to take effort on both of our parts, but I knew that, in the end, it was worth it. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions, but there was a shift. Something in both Daniel and me had changed. The rawness of our pain was still present, but beneath it, a quiet understanding was beginning to take root. The walls that had once seemed so impenetrable between us started to come down, piece by piece. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of what had happened still hung heavily in the air. But every day, we took one more step toward healing. For Daniel, the journey wasn't just about fixing the damage he had caused. It was about rebuilding his own sense of self-worth. He had spent so long hiding his struggles, carrying the burden of debt and responsibility on his own shoulders. Now, he was learning that it was okay to ask for help. He was learning that he didn't have to face his battles alone. The shame that had driven him to make such a drastic decision was slowly being replaced by a more open, vulnerable version of himself. It was painful for him to face the fact that he had pushed me away, but I could see the change in him. He was no longer the son who hid his mistakes. He was the son who was ready to confront his past, ready to make things right. As for me, the process of forgiveness was ongoing. I still had moments when the hurt resurfaced, when I would remember the look of fear in Daniel's eyes when he told me the truth. I would remember how he had closed himself off from me when he needed me most. But each day I found myself learning to let go. Letting go of the anger, letting go of the feeling of betrayal. I realized that while it was important to hold him accountable, it was also important to give myself permission to move forward, to heal, and to rebuild the bond we once shared. One evening, after a long day of work, I sat on the porch, sipping my tea as the sun began to set. It had become one of my favorite places to reflect. The house, though not the same as it had been before, was still home. Daniel had returned, and although we were still in the process of buying it back, there was a sense of peace in the air that hadn't been there before. It wasn't perfect. But it was a start. We had come so far. Daniel came outside and sat down beside me. For the first time in a long time, we were both at ease. No words needed between us. He looked over at me, his eyes softening as he spoke. I've been thinking a lot, Mom, about everything, about what I did. I know I can never undo it, but I want to do better. I want to be someone you can be proud of. I want to make this right. I could hear the sincerity in his voice, but more than that, I could feel it in his presence. There was a calmness in him now, something that had been missing for so long. It was as though he had finally come to terms with his mistakes and, in doing so, had begun to forgive himself. You already are someone I'm proud of, Daniel, I said quietly, my voice full of warmth. You've always been. We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after. You're working hard to fix things, and that's all I can ask for. He smiled, the tension that had lingered between us for so long finally starting to dissolve. I don't deserve your forgiveness yet, but I'm going to work every day to earn it. I'll make it right. I know you will, I said, a soft smile tugging at my lips. And I'm here to help you. We'll figure this out together. In that moment, something inside me shifted. The weight of the past still lingered, but it no longer defined us. Daniel was no longer the son who had betrayed me, and I was no longer the mother who felt betrayed. We were two people, both flawed, both learning, both willing to move forward together. It wasn't about forgetting what had happened. It was about choosing to heal from it, to rebuild from the ground up. The next few months were difficult. We spent long hours working to buy back the house, navigating through legal paperwork and financial hurdles. It wasn't easy, and there were times when the stress seemed overwhelming. But we did it, together. The house we had lost was slowly becoming ours again, and more importantly, our relationship was becoming what it had once been, strong, rooted in trust and love. As we stood outside the house one evening, watching the sunset together, I realized that the home we had lost was not the house itself. It was the bond we had with each other. And though the house was important, it was the rebuilding of our relationship that truly mattered. This was our new beginning, and I knew without a doubt that we were both stronger for having gone through this together. The months that followed the emotional rebuilding process were filled with gradual progress. Daniel and I worked hard to rebuild our relationship, not just through words, but through actions. It wasn't an instant fix. There was no magic moment where everything was suddenly okay. Healing was slow, painful, and, at times, overwhelming. But it was also real, raw, and filled with moments of growth. Our efforts to repurchase the house were finally coming to a close. After all the legal hurdles, paperwork, and financial strain, we had managed to secure it back. It wasn't the same as before. The walls no longer held the same memories, and it would take time for the house to feel like home again. But we had done it, together, and for that, there was a sense of accomplishment. More than that, there was a feeling of hope. We had learned that even the most difficult situations could lead to positive outcomes if we were willing to work for them. As the house was finally secured back into our names, the relief we both felt was immense. But more than the physical home, we had created a new foundation for our relationship. We had learned to communicate openly, to trust each other again, and most importantly, to forgive. Not just each other, but ourselves. I could see in Daniel's eyes that he had grown in ways I hadn't even expected. He had started to take responsibility for his actions and had begun rebuilding his own life, one step at a time. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't perfect, but it was real. One evening, as we sat in the living room, now fully furnished with new furniture and fresh paint, we shared a quiet moment together. The house was still adjusting to its new form, just like we were. The familiar scent of old memories mingled with the fresh new air of change. We had started to make it ours again, but more importantly, we had started to make it ours as a family again. I don't think I can ever repay you for what I've put you through, Daniel said, his voice full of gratitude. I never wanted to hurt you, and I'm sorry for all the pain I caused. But I promise from now on, I'll be the son you deserve. I'll make sure you never have to go through something like this again. I could see the sincerity in his eyes. The same son who had once hidden everything from me, the same son who had made a decision that shattered both our worlds, was now the man who was learning to take accountability. And though the road to trust and forgiveness had been long and hard, I could feel myself letting go of the pain. I wasn't completely healed yet, but I was getting there. You don't have to repay me, Daniel, I said softly. You don't have to fix everything. You're already doing that by being honest, by being open. That's all I've ever wanted. From you. I reached out and placed my hand on his, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. It was the first time in a long while that I felt completely at peace with everything we had gone through. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it, growing from it, and moving forward together. We sat there for a while longer, just enjoying the quiet and the comfort of being together. I reflected on everything we had been through. The pain, the betrayal, the hard work to rebuild, and I realized something important. The house wasn't what mattered most. It was never about the walls or the bricks. It had always been about the people inside it. It had always been about family. And while we had faced hardship and loss, we had also gained something incredible. In return, a deeper understanding of each other, a stronger bond, and a renewed commitment to supporting each other through whatever came next. I could already see the future unfolding in front of us. There would be more challenges, more mistakes, and more obstacles to overcome. But now, I knew that we had the strength to face them. Together. And that was something no amount of money or possessions could ever replace. As the night settled in and we began to prepare for bed, I felt a sense of peace that had eluded me for so long. The journey was far from over, but I knew we were on the right path. The lesson I had learned throughout this ordeal was simple but profound. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about understanding, about growth, and about choosing to move forward with an open heart. And in that moment, I knew that no matter what the future held, Daniel and I would face it together, stronger than we had ever been before.